Welcome back to Martial Sword, where legends never die. In the last episode, the shadows of Soren Vale's past began to close in. Now, danger looms even closer. Join us as Soren and Aric venture deeper into the unknown, where hidden enemies and long-buried secrets await. Don't forget to like and subscribe as it encourages us to write more for our audience. Soren and Aric Dawnfire arrived at a rundown inn at the edge of Serathis, the weight of the investigation pressing down on their shoulders. The sun had already dipped below the horizon, leaving the town shrouded in an eerie twilight. The rustic inn stood like a silent sentinel amidst the creeping mist, its once proud exterior now weathered by years of neglect. The creaking of the wooden sign swinging in the wind only added to the feeling that they were stepping into unknown danger. The air was thick with unease, a feeling of foreboding that made every step feel heavier. As they entered the dimly lit inn, the atmosphere shifted instantly. The sounds of muffled whispers filled the room as they crossed the threshold, and several shadowy figures in dark robes turned their heads slowly to observe them. Their gazes were cold and calculating, like they knew exactly who was walking through the door. Soren's instincts flared. This wasn't a meeting, it was a trap. A masked assailant stepped forward, moving smoothly through the shadows with the grace of a predator. In a swift motion, the figure drew a glinting blade and lunged at Soren and Aric without warning. The faint shimmer of the blade in the dim light was the only warning they got before the assailant struck. The speed of the attack caught them off guard, and the battle began in an instant. Aric's reaction was immediate. He drew his sword, but his inexperience was evident. He swung wide, missing his target as the assailant expertly dodged the strike. The attacker retaliated quickly, aiming for Aric's midsection. With a sharp gasp, Aric barely managed to deflect the blow, his sword slipping in his grasp. His fighting style was still raw, there was no grace in his movements, only raw enthusiasm and force. Soren, despite the poison wreaking havoc on his body, finally drew his own sword. His movements were slow and deliberate, every strike carrying the weight of his past experience. But the poison made it harder. His breath came in ragged bursts as his body fought against him. The poison was eating away at his strength, making each move feel like a battle against his own flesh. The fight escalated quickly. Aric's blade clanged against the assailants with a sharp, metallic sound, but he struggled to match the attacker's skill. The figure's movements were fluid, each strike a precise, calculated effort to wear Aric down. The camera captures Aric's eager face, his youthful energy burning through each swing, but it's clear his inexperience is costing him. Soren, his sword drawn, steps in to help, though every motion feels more labored than the last. His strike is slow but powerful, an attack born from years of experience. But the poison continues to rob him of his usual grace. The camera lingers on Soren's strained face as he fights, the sweat dripping down his brow, his hand trembling as he swings the blade. The poison's toll is evident, his movements are not the precise, deadly strikes they once were, but heavy-handed, desperate attempts to defend himself and Aric. In a moment of gritted resolve, Soren finally lands a blow. The assailant stumbles back, clearly weakened, but not defeated. Soren's breathing is ragged, and he struggles to keep his balance, feeling the weight of the poison pressing in. But his blade remains steady, a silent promise to himself that he would not let his past, or this fight, break him. The figure, sensing the changing tide, takes a cautious step back, regaining composure as it becomes clear that the battle is not yet over. But the assailant doesn't retreat entirely. No, they were here for something more than a fight. "You've been too long hidden, Soren Vale," the figure says, their voice cold as ice, mocking. "But the shadows of your past are never far behind." Before Soren can respond, the figure retreats into the darkness, disappearing as quietly as they had come. The tension lingers in the room, thick with unresolved danger. Aric picks up his sword from the floor, his hand still shaking with the adrenaline of the fight. "Who was that?" Aric asks, his voice breathless, his eyes filled with a mix of fear and curiosity. Soren's gaze hardens as he sheaths his blade, a flash of old memories crossing his face. He knows this is just the beginning. "Someone from my past," Soren replies quietly, his voice tinged with regret. "And they've just found us." As the dust settled from the fight, the inn returned to its eerie quiet, though the heavy weight of tension hung in the air. The mask of calm that Soren had so carefully built was now slipping, revealing the underlying danger that constantly stalked him. He wiped the blood from his blade, his hand still shaking, feeling the familiar pull of the poison coursing through his veins. Each breath was a struggle. Aric, still wide-eyed from the chaos they had just survived, was the first to speak. "Soren, are you all right?" His voice trembled slightly, unsure if he was addressing the physical toll of the fight or the deeper wounds Soren kept hidden. Soren merely nodded, his expression unreadable as he slid his sword back into its sheath. He hadn't anticipated this kind of violence so soon. He had hoped, at least for a moment, to keep the shadows of his past locked away. But the arrival of a new figure shattered that hope. The door creaked open, and a cold breeze rushed in, sweeping across the floor and ruffling the papers scattered across the room. A female figure stepped into the inn's dim light, a familiar presence that brought with it a rush of memories. Lena Morrow, her features as sharp as ever, stood at the threshold. Her long black hair was pulled back in a practical braid, and her dark robes flowed behind her, a stark contrast to the warmth of the room. She had the same piercing eyes that had once burned with uncompromising resolve, but now there was a glimmer of concern in them. "Soren," Lena greeted him coolly, her voice edged with a sharp undertone of urgency. "I see you're still alive. I didn't expect you to make it out so easily." Soren's gaze flickered to her, his expression tightening as memories of their shared past in the Iron Wind Order flooded him. They had fought side by side, once united by a cause that now seemed a distant illusion. But with Lena's return, everything that had been buried beneath years of silence seemed to come rushing back. "Lena," Soren's voice was low, strained, almost cautious, as if every word was carefully weighed. "What are you doing here?" Her lips tightened, and she took a step further into the room, closing the distance between them. "I should ask you the same. You've come back, haven't you? Thought you could leave it all behind, but the martial world doesn't forget. Your Iron Wind Order is stirring, Soren, and you're at the center of it." Soren's jaw tightened. His hand unconsciously drifted to his side, near the sword hilt. But the poison inside him was already beginning to gnaw at his strength again. The momentary rage he felt was quickly swallowed by the crushing weight of his past. "You shouldn't have come." Soren's voice was softer now, barely more than a murmur. He took a step back, trying to distance himself from the painful truth. "There's nothing left for us to do. The order is gone." Lena's gaze softened, but only for a moment. "You don't get it, do you?" She replied, her voice hard and determined. "Darius Vane isn't the only one looking for you. You think running away will save you, but it won't. There's too much at stake now. Your return has set things in motion." The room seemed to grow smaller as the weight of her words settled into the space between them. Aric, still standing off to the side, watched the exchange with confusion and growing concern. He had seen the mysterious tension between them before, but now it was clearer than ever. These two were tied to something far darker than he could understand. Lena's gaze flicked to Aric, her expression unreadable. "And who's this?" she asked, her tone dripping with curiosity but also a hint of disdain. "Another apprentice you've picked up on your little journey? Or is he something more than that?" Aric stiffened but didn't say a word. The tension between him and Lena was palpable, a clash of past and present that he could feel but not yet fully grasp. Soren's voice cut through the silence, edged with finality. "He's nothing. Don't worry about him." He turned his gaze back to Lena. "But if you're done with your warnings, I suggest you leave. I've made my choice." Lena stepped forward, her voice now full of warning. "You can't ignore this, Soren. You can't run from your past. Darius isn't the only one who's going to come for you. There are others, older, more dangerous. And you've just put yourself right in the middle of it all. There's nowhere left to hide." A cold silence fell over them. Soren looked down for a moment, weighed down by the memory of betrayal and the ghosts of a life he could never outrun. Lena's warning hung in the air like a storm cloud, ready to break at any moment. I've made my peace with that. Soren's voice was quiet, but resolute. Now leave before you drag me deeper into it. For a moment, it seemed as if Lena would argue. But she only stared at Soren, her eyes cold, calculating, as if weighing the truth in his words. She finally nodded, turning toward the door, but not before leaving one final remark. Don't say I didn't warn you, she muttered as she disappeared into the shadows. The room was quiet once more, and the weight of Lena's words lingered in the air. Aric looked at Soren, concern now etched on his face. You're not fine, are you? Aric asked gently, but Soren's gaze was distant, lost in the storm of his past. I never was, Soren replied, his voice barely above a whisper. The dimly lit study of the inn was silent, save for the distant howl of the wind outside. The flickering candlelight cast long shadows against the walls, making the room feel smaller, almost suffocating. Soren Vale sat at the edge of a worn wooden table, his hand pressed against his chest, feeling the faint throb of the poison that had been inside him for so long. It was worse tonight, more intense. The usual dull ache in his ribs had spread throughout his body, each breath a battle, each movement slower than the last. Aric Dawnfire stood across from him, frowning as he noticed the change in Soren. The usually stoic doctor was barely holding on, his pale complexion and labored breathing enough to make Aric uneasy. His normally sharp eyes were clouded, and sweat beaded along his brow. Soren, Aric said, his voice tinged with concern. You're not looking well. Let me help. Just tell me what you need. But Soren's hand shot out, his palm pushing against the table, as if to steady himself. His voice came out in a hoarse whisper, almost strained. I don't need your help, Aric. Aric took a step closer, but Soren's eyes, though heavy with pain, were clear and determined. I'm fine, Soren muttered, though the words didn't match the way his body trembled. Aric stood, watching him with growing concern. You're not fine. Look at you. This isn't normal. Soren's eyes hardened. The pride he carried from his former life as Kael Ren, the leader of the Iron Wind Order, would not allow him to accept help. He pushed himself to stand, the pain flashing through his chest like a knife, but his resolve was stronger than the poison, at least that's what he told himself. I said I'm fine, he repeated, his tone sharper this time. Aric, growing desperate, moved to help him again, but this time, Soren took a step back, putting a hand on his sword hilt. Stay back, Aric. You don't understand. The moment hung between them, heavy with unspoken tension. Aric's face was a mixture of frustration and genuine concern, but Soren turned away from him, walking slowly to the window. The moonlight was soft, casting a pale glow across the floor, but Soren only saw the shadows of the past creeping in the battlefields, the betrayal, the fight for his life that never seemed to end. In the quiet of the room, Soren's internal battle raged, but the poison inside him fought harder. As he struggled to keep his composure, his mind flashed back to one of his former battles a moment before everything had changed, when he had been at his peak strength. Flashback. The roar of battle filled the air as Soren stood at the front of his men, his sword raised high. His body moved with the fluidity of a master, each strike landing with precision, his blade cutting through the air like it was an extension of his own soul. Aric wasn't there, but the clash of weapons rang in his ears as Soren's footfalls thundered across the battlefield. The camera captures Soren, powerful and unwavering, as he deflects blow after blow. The Iron Wind Order stood behind him, a solid line of warriors, but it was Soren's mastery that kept them united. His swordsmanship was unmatched, and the enemies he faced crumbled in the wake of his force. He was Kael Ren then, undefeated and unstoppable, the weight of his blade a symbol of strength, the fire in his heart a symbol of his ambition. Back in the present, Soren Vale stood alone in the room, his hand pressed against the cold stone of the window sill. The sounds of the flashback faded as the weight of reality set in. He was no longer that man. Soren's hand moved instinctively to his side, where his sword lay within reach. His chest tightened with each breath, but he held the blade steady in his grip. The poison inside him may have weakened his body, but it did not extinguish his resolve. Aric stepped forward again, this time placing a hand gently on Soren's shoulder, his voice quieter. You don't have to fight this alone, Soren. We can find a way to cure this. Please, just let me help. Soren closed his eyes, the exhaustion pulling at him like an anchor. It's too late for that. His words were low, almost regretful, but there was something in them that carried the weight of a man who had given up on redemption. Soren slowly turned to face Aric, his expression softening for a moment. I've made my choice. This is my burden to bear. His eyes flicked to the sword in his hand, then to Aric's face, where concern and confusion mixed. If you want to help, Aric, stay with me. Stay strong. The real fight hasn't even begun. The soft glow of the moonlight bathed the inn in an eerie silence, casting long shadows across the wooden floors. The wind outside howled like a distant wolf, but within the dimly lit room, all was still. Soren Vale and Aric Dawnfire sat at a small table in the corner, deep in discussion about their next move. The name Thorn still lingered in the air between them, the weight of their investigation hanging over their shoulders like an iron chain. Every decision seemed to lead them deeper into unknown and dangerous territory. Soren, his face drawn with weariness, looked at the map spread before him, but his mind wasn't on the next steps. Instead, he was still haunted by the figure he had faced earlier in the night, the masked assailant who had attacked him in the inn. Darius Vane, a name that had been a ghost in his mind for years, now seemed like a present threat. As Soren stared at the map, his mind swirled with the memories of the Ironwind Order, the rivalries that had torn it apart, and the betrayal that had shattered his soul. He was lost in thought, his hand still resting lightly on the hilt of his sword, when he heard a sound, a subtle shift in the air. Aric, noticing the change in Soren's posture, looked up. "What is it?" he asked, his voice full of curiosity. Soren's eyes narrowed, his senses honed by years of battle and survival. Someone was watching them. The camera panned slowly to the shadows in the far corner of the room, where a silhouette stood, motionless. The figure was hidden just enough to stay unnoticed, but the weight of their presence filled the room like a growing storm. The camera lingered on the shape, the form unmistakable, a tall man, imposing, with an air of cold determination. The moonlight cast a faint glow across the figure's features, revealing only a small portion of his face, enough for Soren to recognize the scar that marred his rival's skin. Darius Vane. The name whispered through Soren's mind like a curse. His grip on his sword tightened instinctively, a response honed through years of combat. The internal conflict between his weakened body and his need to confront his past flashed across his eyes. This was a fight he knew he could not avoid, though the toll of the poison still weighed heavily on him. Aric, standing nearby, looked confused, unable to see the figure in the shadows. "What's happening?" he asked, stepping closer to Soren. Before Soren could respond, Darius stepped forward from the shadows, his blade gleaming in the moonlight, the cold sneer on his face unmistakable. His tall frame towered over them, his movements calculated and measured, like a predator waiting for the right moment to strike. "So, the great Soren Vale has returned." Darius's voice was a low growl, filled with mockery. He took a step closer, his sword drawn, the light reflecting off the blade's sharp edge. "I knew you'd come back eventually, but I didn't expect you to be so weak." Soren's hand instinctively moved to his own sword. The familiar cold steel in his grip felt heavier than ever. He knew this battle would be different from those in the past. Darius wasn't just any foe, he was a reminder of everything Soren had lost. With a gritted jaw, Soren faced his old rival. "I'm not here to fight you, Darius," he said through clenched teeth. But his words fell on deaf ears. Darius's cold eyes locked onto Soren's, a taunting smile curling on his lips. "Too bad, then," Darius mocked. "I've been waiting for this moment for a long time. Now, let's see if the mighty Kael Ren still has anything left." Without warning, Darius charged, his sword flashing through the air with lightning speed. Soren, though weakened, moved with grace, barely able to block the strike with his sword. The impact sent a shockwave through his arms, but he held his ground, desperate not to fall. Aric stepped forward, sword drawn, but before he could engage, Darius delivered a swift kick to his chest, sending him crashing into a nearby table. Aric groaned as he hit the floor, dazed, unable to help Soren. The fight between Soren and Darius was slow, deliberate, each of their strikes heavy and laden with history. Soren's movements were labored, each swing feeling as if his body was fighting against him. The poison inside him was dragging him down, and it was clear that his body was no longer what it used to be. His sword, though still sharp, lacked the quickness it once had. Darius, however, was relentless, his fury in every strike, his blade dancing through the air. Soren could feel the weight of every attack, his body screaming in protest. But he fought back with all he had. A powerful strike pushed Darius back for a moment, the force behind it startling even himself. But Darius's strength and speed soon overwhelmed Soren. With precise movements, Darius disarmed Soren, sending his blade skittering across the floor. Soren stumbled, unable to regain his balance, his strength faltering under the weight of his exhaustion and poison. "It's over, Soren," Darius sneered, his sword raised for the final blow. But just as the blade descended, Soren managed to roll out of the way, narrowly avoiding death. He grabbed the nearest object, a broken chair leg, and swung it with all his might, catching Darius off guard. The impact knocked Darius back, forcing him to retreat into the shadows. Breathing heavily, Soren stood, his chest rising and falling with every breath. His body was screaming at him to stop, but his mind refused to relent. "This isn't over," Soren said through clenched teeth, his eyes locked on Darius, who was already disappearing into the night. "You'll pay for this, Darius." Darius's voice echoed from the darkness, mocking, "We'll see, Soren. We'll see." The camera zoomed out, showing Soren standing alone in the center of the room, his breath labored, his body battered, but his spirit unbroken. The tension in the room was palpable, as the shadows of his past had once again found him, and the road ahead was filled with inevitable conflict. The flickering flame of the candle cast long shadows across the dimly lit study of the inn. Soren Vale sat at the far end of the room, his back turned to the wooden table where Aric Dawnfire was sifting through the papers they had gathered. The moonlight streamed through the window, but it offered little comfort to Soren, whose mind was clouded by the recent events and the unshakable feeling that Darius Vane's return was only the beginning of a much larger threat. The sound of parchment rustling broke the silence. Aric's voice cut through the stillness. "Soren, I think I've found something." Soren turned slowly, his gaze shifting to the eager apprentice who was now leaning over a piece of paper with an intense focus. Aric held up the sheet in front of him, the name written across it standing out against the scribbled notes. "Thorn," Aric said, his voice filled with excitement. "This is it. This could be the lead we've been looking for." Thorn, the name that keeps popping up in connection to Lord Brenner's murder. Soren's eyes narrowed. The name Thorn rang like a distant bell in his mind, but it was not a name he had wanted to face. Doubt crept into his expression as he slowly crossed the room and stood next to Aric. His hands remained still at his sides, despite the growing urgency in Aric's tone. "You're sure about this?" Soren asked, his voice cautious, betraying the hesitation in his heart. He had dealt with too many unpredictable variables to trust something as simple as a name on a piece of paper. "Yes," Aric pressed, his eyes bright with enthusiasm. "It's a strong lead. Thorn has connections to the martial world, the same world that we've already stumbled into with Lord Brenner's death. If we track him down, we might find answers." Soren stood in front of the desk, looking at the papers, his gaze fixed on Thorn's name. The quiet was deafening, the silence in the room growing heavier with every passing second. He could feel the poison in his veins, the gnawing ache, the weakness that had been a constant companion. The fight against Darius Vane had drained him, but his body wasn't the only thing suffering, his soul was, too. He had tried so hard to bury his past, to escape the very thing that was now pulling him back in. The name Thorn was more than just a clue. It was a doorway to the darkness he had hoped to leave behind. "I don't know if we should pursue this, Aric," Soren said quietly, his voice tinged with reluctance. "We've already put ourselves in enough danger." But Aric was undeterred, his youthful enthusiasm burning through the air. He stepped closer to Soren, his voice rising with passion. "If we don't do this, then Lord Brenner's death will be nothing more than another unsolved mystery. We need to find the answers, Soren." We can't afford to wait any longer. Soren's jaw clenched, and for a moment he simply stared at Aric. The internal conflict that raged within him was like a storm, the clash between his desire to protect Aric from the dangerous world Soren had left behind, and the undeniable need to confront the past head-on. He knew, deep down, that the decision to follow this lead would set them on a path that would make it harder to ever return to the life they had before. Soren finally broke the silence with a sigh, his shoulders heavy with the weight of his decision. Fine. The word came out begrudgingly, but with a hint of resolve. He stepped away from the desk and moved toward the window, his hand resting lightly on the cold stone sill. We'll go after Thorn. Aric's face lit up with a mixture of relief and excitement. He stepped forward, eager to begin the next phase of their investigation. I knew you'd see reason, Soren. Soren didn't reply right away. His thoughts were too tangled in the past and the dangerous road ahead. The fighting he had avoided for so long was now unavoidable. Thorn was just the beginning, and soon they would be on the path to the true source of the darkness that had followed Soren all these years. But before they could move forward, Soren turned back to Aric, his voice low but filled with a warning. Aric, I don't want you to get caught up in this world. You have no idea what it can do to you. It's not just fighting, it's the betrayals, the deceptions. The closer we get to the truth, the more dangerous it becomes. And I won't let you be dragged down with me. Aric's expression was full of fire, unwavering in his resolve. I can handle it, Soren. I trust you, and I'm in this with you, no matter what comes. Soren's gaze softened for a moment, a flicker of respect crossing his features. But there was something else there too, something that spoke of the weight of the path they were now walking. Then let's go. Soren said, his voice heavy with the knowledge that their decision would change everything. But stay alert. We're heading into dangerous territory. As they gathered their things and made their way toward the door, Soren's hand brushed against the sword hilt at his side, a silent reminder of the violence and threats that still awaited them. The weight of his decision felt like a boulder pressing down on his chest. They were about to walk straight into the heart of the martial world's politics, and nothing would ever be the same. Thank you for watching Martial Sword, where legends never die. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to stay updated on the latest episodes. We're diving deeper into Soren's journey, and you won't want to miss what's coming next. Join us tomorrow for episode 5, where the stakes get even higher and new dangers await. The past isn't finished with Soren yet, and the real fight is just beginning. See you then.